talk about Daniel Ellsberg. We were both Marines, and I'm a former ex-Marine. I gave it up. I'm no longer an ex-Marine. But now let me tell you something about Daniel Ellsberg. He's an extraordinary person. There are two Daniel Ellsbergs actually going to the fence today. One of them was molded throughout his childhood out of the consciousness of the nation that had just defeated Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. America, as everyone called it, was breathing a huge sigh of relief and setting itself to the task of rebuilding the world, an endeavor broadly understood in Daniel's world and in mine to be beneficial to all people at the time. After all, Father knew best in those days, and America was number one, as the Vietnamese used to bullshit us. In that world, Daniel Ellsberg excelled. Early training in classical piano had likely played a role in heightening his intellectual skills. The neurophysicists are telling us that these days. He excelled in school. He won a competitive scholarship to Harvard where he graduated third in his class. See, you can go to Harvard and you can get an education, you know. It's true. He then went into the Marine Corps and became an infantry captain, commander when other folks were asked to give up their companies because someone of a higher rank came aboard. Daniel Ellsberg held his company because of his excellence and his rapport and his love for the soldiers. And he stood out. He stood out there. He stood out at the Rand Corporation, where he was the best and the brightest of the best and the brightest that Halbert Stem had told us about. He was deployed, he was deployed in the Marine Corps to the Suez Canal, where he's witnessed the suffering of the Egyptian people. Daniel went on to be good friends with John Paul Vann. John Paul Vann was a soldier. When Daniel got to Vietnam, he went to places nobody else had ever been to. He went to jungle roads that were almost overgrown and there was no passing. Daniel was impressed by peace activists in his life. Number one, I think, was Virginia Marks. Daniel's life, his new life, began when he heard the words, "I am going to jail." You can leave here today and say those words down the road about this experience and other experiences, and you can move people in the way that Daniel Ellsberg continues to move people. So thank you very much.
Greetings, winter soldiers. I like this snow. It does define us as winter soldiers. It reminds me, my grade school verses, what was that? These are the times that try men's souls, that's for sure, and women's souls. In these times of crisis, the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will fade away, but the winter soldier is here. How many people were in Vietnam? How many of you were vets? Take a look. Okay, well, you know what I'm saying. When I talk about Vietnamistan right now, people ask me, aren't there differences between Afghanistan and Vietnam? Well, yeah, sure there are. It didn't snow in Vietnam, right? We didn't have that. That's one of the great differences. You know, 40 years ago, 6 weeks before the Pentagon Papers came out, there actually in the winter just before that, there had been a hearing called Winter Soldier in Detroit, another one in New York, which John Kerry then participated in, just back from Vietnam, which went through the atrocities that he had participated in, and the torture, the killing, the massacres in Vietnam that he talked about then. He ran away from that experience in his campaign, didn't want to talk about it, as if that never happens. Americans don't do that. At the very time, of course, when these WikiLeaks exposures are showing shamefully that the torture is still going on by our Iraqi allies with our knowledge, without investigation by us, under Barack Obama, who promised to end torture. Now, John Kerry did take part then in a veterans action, like this one, a veterans action, just before the Pentagon Papers came out. It was just before a May Day demonstration that somebody just reminded me he was in May Day with me. How many people were in May Day? 1971. Okay. Now you'll remember that just before that, the veterans did one of the great iconic acts of the 20th century when they threw their medals, including a Medal of Honor winner, all their medals over the White House fence. John Kerry threw somebody else's medals, as it worked out later. He kept his, but he did speak very eloquently to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, of which he now chairs 40 years later. And what he said to Senator Fulbright then was a speech that ended, who wants to be the last man to die for a mistake? Well, nobody has to worry about that today, to being the last man. I'm afraid the war in Afghanistan, if it goes on without more resistance, without this kind of resistance growing bigger and bigger, is going to go on long after the last man fighting there now has gone out of the killing zone, has retired, has gone out. As General Petraeus said, this is the kind of war that goes on all our lives and our kids' lives, is what he's saying. So you don't have to worry about being the last man, but the mistake, yes. The mistake was made, a great mistake was made by Barack Obama last year, a year this month, December 1st, when he sent 30,000 more men to a hopeless, useless war in Afghanistan where they served no American purpose, where the lives they took and the lives they lost are, sorry to say, wasted unless we wake up from that sacrifice and determine not to send any more. I believe that later today, by all forecasts, Barack Obama will compound that mistake by confirming that he wasn't wrong. Presidents don't like to say they were wrong before. So he's going to say, no, we weren't wrong then. It's going fine. And we're going to keep them there and we'll send more. I'm afraid that will happen indefinitely unless more people follow the example of Bradley Manning, whose courageous act of civil disobedience probably confronts him with life in jail. But he said he was ready to go to jail, prison for life, or even be executed, he said to the person who informed on him, in order to inform the American people and hope to start a debate, discussion, and reform that might save us all. Nothing more patriotic has been said. Now he said, or even be executed, and when he said that, that probably would have looked like hyperbole. Of course, there are calls for his execution constantly now from the halls of Congress. When Richard Nixon sent a dozen people with orders on May 3rd, 1972, to incapacitate Daniel Ellsberg totally, on the steps of the Capitol on May 3rd, that was a covert action. And when it was exposed, it confronted him with possible impeachment or resignation. It led to his impeachment or prosecution. It led to his resignation and helped end the war. We've arrived 40 years later at a time when calls like that for incapacitation, assassination, extra-legal execution can be made openly in the halls of Congress. It's a time of degradation, actually, that should happen. If that's not likely to happen to Bradley Manning, though it could. They could change his charges to treason, possibly. They're talking about that. They could define him as an enemy terrorist who could be hunted down, in effect, or like the same for Julian Assange, and executed without trial, without charges, without anything. It's not likely to happen, but if it did, we'd have to recognize that the last man who was executed in this country for giving secrets to Americans was Nathan Hale. And Bradley Manning would be in that tradition. And as a matter of fact, we would have come full circle. Nathan Hale was hanged by representatives of the Crown, and now the very prosecution of Manning, of Julian Assange, of WikiLeaks, or of the New York Times would represent that the Crown had come back to America and was sitting on their head of an American president. So I'm very impressed to see people here in the snow, and I'm not flattering you to say the winter soldiers. The fact is that I've been at rallies in the last few years, much smaller than this one, in nice weather, and the fact that people are ready to get arrested today, I think, veterans especially, is a very good start to the rest of our lives, because this is going to go on for a long time. The fact is that the biggest rallies in human history were held on February 17th, 2003 around the world, including millions of people in this country, to try to